Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is gather. Let's take a look at some of the definitions or ways that we use this verb. The first way you might hear the verb gather used is to mean to come together or to assemble. So, with this idea of coming together, we might think of people gathering or people assembling. A second way you may hear the verb gather used is to mean to bring together and take in from scattered places or sources. So the second definition is really quite broad. It could apply to people or things. Sometimes, connected to the second definition, we'll talk about harvesting or bringing crops in from a field. So it's coming from multiple rows, different areas perhaps of a garden, a farm, etc. A third way you might hear the verb gather used is to mean to understand. So, for this particular definition, you might hear people say, I gathered from my discussions with this group that they feel such and such, right? So, I am taking the information I heard, sort of processing it, and explaining what I understood. A fourth way you might hear the verb gather used is to mean to summon up a mental or physical attribute for a purpose. So, some people will use this particular usage for gathering their thoughts, gathering some strength, etc. So that the idea there of a mental or a physical attribute. And usually that's done again with this specific purpose in mind. You should know that gather is a regular verb. To make the progressive tense, all we need to do is add ing to form gathering. The past tense and participle forms of this verb are made by adding ed. The base verb gather, ends in this r sound. It's a voiced consonant, so our past tense ending is going to make a d sound. Gathered, gathered. Now, let's take a moment to look at some phrasal verbs with gather. The first one we'll look at is gather from. This, again, connects back to that idea of collecting something. An example of that, she gathered flowers from her garden. So she collected flowers from this particular place. A second phrasal verb you might hear is gather together. And this can mean to group someone or some things in one particular place or location. Here's an example. I'll gather together my things and then I'll be ready to go. So the person who's speaking this might say or be thinking that they're going to collect or group certain items, maybe put them in a bag or purse, etc. And then they'll be ready to depart. The third phrasal verb you may hear with gather is to gather up. And again, this goes back to that idea of collecting or assembling certain things. An example sentence. He gathered the plates up and put them in the dishwasher. Right? So perhaps the plates were on different tables, so he collects them and then puts them in the dishwasher. I'll note here that you don't have to use the preposition up, right? If we just said he gathered the plates and put them in the dishwasher, that sentence is going to have the exact same meaning. This might be more common regionally, though, to hear gather up. So just to something to be aware of. Now let's continue using our verb of the day, gather, in a couple different tenses. Today we're going to practice the imperative and the present progressive. Let's start with the imperative. We use this verb tense to give commands. So we're telling someone to do a particular action. We're not recommending it or suggesting it. This is, again, a command. So sometimes this can feel maybe a bit too direct to speak in this way. So we can always soften our commands by using the word please at the beginning or please at the end, but you don't need it in both places. What's special about the imperative is that there isn't a stated subject in these sentences. So the subject is implied. It can be you singular, so you meaning one person, or it could be you plural, meaning two or more people. So, so you're not going to see a stated subject here. You're just going to see us begin with the verb in the affirmative. All right, so with this affirmative example, imagine a parent talking to a child or children. Okay, gather up your toys now. Right, so the idea here would be maybe pick them up, put them in the toy box or wherever they are stored or kept. If I want to make a negative imperative sentence, I want to start with do not and then the base verb. It might look something like this. Don't gather together indoors if you haven't been vaccinated. Right? So again, this just isn't meant as advice, but a command, right? For your safety during this ongoing pandemic, do not gather in large groups with people outside of your household if those people haven't been vaccinated. Now, let's take a look at the present progressive. In some textbooks, you'll see this called the present continuous, means the same thing. We're using this verb tense to talk about an activity that is in progress or something that is happening now. I like calling this the present progressive, so seeing those two P's to help us remember we need two parts to make this verb tense. In the affirmative, we're going to use a present form of be, so that's am, is, or are, and then we're going to use the ing form of the verb. Let's take a look at our affirmative example. The local newspaper is gathering stories from people about their experiences during the pandemic. So here's this idea of collecting. So they talk to one person, maybe record or write down what they say, then they repeat that with a different person, and they repeat and repeat. So this idea of they're collecting many stories. If you want to make a negative present progressive sentence, you should insert not after our be verb. You might see the contractions isn't and aren't used, but we do not have a contraction with am not. And after that, so be verb, not, and then that ing form of the verb. Let's look at our negative example. This company isn't gathering their customers' data. So here, again, the idea of collecting something. Finally, if you want to make a yes or no question, you want to start with your form of be, and that should match the subject, which comes next, and then we'll use the ing form of the verb. Are you gathering your thoughts before you respond to the email? So here, this sentence is tying back to that fourth definition of the verb we looked at earlier today. And here, this person is sort of saying, kind of summoning, right, that mental strength. Perhaps the email was really upsetting, and we know we shouldn't send emails when we're angry. So they're kind of taking time, collecting their thoughts, maybe doing a couple deep breaths to be a little more relaxed before they respond to that particular message. Now, let's spend just a couple minutes looking at words that are related to our verb gather. And the first word we're going to look at is the noun gathering. This is an assembly or a meeting, and many times it's going to have a social or festive, so you might think party, celebration, and this assembly or meeting is being held for some specific purpose. Here's an example of this. Is it safe for us to hold a 4th of July gathering? Right? So this is a question many groups and organizations are asking. Is it safe, because of the pandemic, for us to have a bunch of people gather together, come together? A second word you might hear is gatherer. This is a noun. It's referring to a person or a group who gathers. Here's an example of how you might have heard this used before. That society consisted of hunters and gatherers. Right? So here we're describing how this particular group of people fed themselves. Right? They hunted and they gathered. They may have picked berries, nuts, other items to survive in addition to hunting animals. Thanks so much for watching today's video. I hope you have a great day.